Welcome to a podcast celebrating Scottish culture and entertainment, which is here to sing the praises of books, films, comedy, music, theatre, exhibitions, telly, poetry, and all that jazz. I'm Nicola Meehan. I'm an arts writer and broadcaster, and I'll give you the lowdown on what's coming up, what's happening now, what came before, and what we love, which is to say that every week, nearly, I'm here to give you a kick up the arts. Now, Scotland's crime writing festival, Bloody Scotland, kicks off tomorrow. That is Friday, September the 12th. And we'll all be there. Hopefully you will too. It would be fab to see you in my hometown of Stirling. Ian Rankin's the guest programmer. I am chairing Ian and various actors who have played Rebus over the years at the Albert Halls tomorrow. That's Friday night. And then I'm in conversation with Mark Billingham and Laura Lippman. I cannot wait for this. That's on Saturday afternoon. And there are so many terrific events taking place from Friday to Sunday. They'll also be announcing this year's winners of the McIlvanney and Debut Prizes. These are the huge book awards, but honestly, just dive into all of the nominated novels. There are so many murderous, wonderful thrills in there. To celebrate all of that, I caught up with a couple of brilliant best-selling and award-winning crime writers earlier today. We were live with a really lovely audience at the Stand Comedy Club's gorgeous new home on Glasgow's Great Western Road. Now, before I introduce them, I should tell you that when I had the idea of trying to launch this podcast from a kitchen table where I am right now, incidentally, almost exactly this time last year, I got in touch with a few folk that I really love, and it would never have happened without their encouragement. It would never have got off the ground, and Chris Brookmyre was one of the first out the gates. Because along with shining a light on cultural goings-on across the country in art spaces every week, or thereabouts, I do try. I had this idea to run a special series where guests spoke about some of their favourite Scottish albums and films and books. I called that series A Kick Up the Arts All Back to Mine, and Chris was the very first person I asked, and thankfully he said yes. If you fancy, you can listen back to that chat from a year ago, along with subsequent episodes with the likes of Barbara Dixon, Justin Curry from Delamitri, Grant Stott, Claire Grogan, King Creosote, Jonathan Watson, Val McDermott, and telly and theatre legend Dave Anderson. He was in the audience at the Stand today in Glasgow like the absolute cultural beacon he has always been. He's also a huge fan of Chris Brookmyre. Chris is an incredible author in his own right, but he also creates fascinating, chilling historical fiction with his partner in crime and his wife, the writer and consultant anaesthetist Dr. Marisa Haetzman, under the guise together of Ambrose Parry. I am a huge fan of the Ambrose Parry novels. The latest, The Death of Shame, came out earlier this summer, and I cannot get enough of Raven and Fisher. And I always love chatting to Chris and Marisa. And so, in the first of a few monthly Thursday afternoon sessions at Glasgow Stand, Chris and Marisa were my very special guests for an Ambrose Parry joint edition of All Back to Mine.
Come and have a little seat on the couch. I came in, I kicked down all the lovely water. I didn't kick the plant down. How are you, Marisa?
Very well, thank you.
I am particularly delighted to be joined on stage by you because you sat in. It was a year ago almost to the day when Chris and I recorded the first episode for the podcast. It was at Bloody Scotland, which is
in
this
a record
weekend.
shop, I remember.
It was
a record
indeed
shop.
Stirling's finest Europa music. We sat in the back and Marisa listened into the chat just to make sure it was all above board. But straight afterwards, it was lovely because you said, this could work live. And also, Chris is like, Marissa's got quite a few ideas as well. You kind of started thinking about it back then.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoyed listening to it, and I think it was such a great idea, and there's so much scope that I thought, I would totally listen to this.
Yeah, exactly.
I think as I could see her just shaking her head as she browsed the record racks at some of my choices.
You came up with your choices. We will just tell you what they were. It was Big Country's The Crossing. It was Highlander, by the way. You can listen back to this conversation. Wonderful movie. Sci-fi and historical, all of which features and more in Chris's writing, and a lot of it in Ambrose Parry's. Not so much the sci-fi so far, but who knows what's next. And a book by the wonderful Ian Banks. Rock and roll epic, Espadare Street. We may hear more about Ian Banks a little bit later on, we'll see. So almost a year. We were at Bloody Scotland. It's happening again this very weekend, it's obviously I live in Stirling, but it's always a highlight on the calendar, isn't it? Just being in that place and all the writers and the karaoke and everything else that goes with it.
Oh, it's one of the most fun weekends on the calendar for crime fiction, because I guess the writers get to kind of let their hair down, and everyone gets to see each other in a completely different context, whether it's playing badly at five-a-sides or now there used to be crime at the coup where people would do a wee turn. Now it's going to be karaoke at the coup. So yeah, if you want to see some crime writers really embarrassing themselves, that's your venue for it.
What's your karaoke favourite?
Do you know, the weird thing, I'd only ever did karaoke for the first time about a year ago, so I don't have a favourite. What I've realised is that almost nothing is in my key, but you only find that out once you're halfway into a song.
What about yours, Marisa? Have you
no, I'm not
partaken?
I'm not brave enough to do karaoke, no.
Not yet?
No.
Stirling does that to us. I don't sing karaoke in Stirling anymore because I was banned from every pub for karaoke and singing back in 1992. That bar has yet to be lifted. You're not tempted to join the fun-loving crime writers?
Well, I don't play any instruments.
I don't think that should stop you.
And I'm not much of a singer, so...
Live your rock and roll life vicariously through
Definitely.
this.
I just do a bit of dancing.
Well, I tell you what, we were all doing that. We were at Brookmyre. This was at the start of August. Time is kind of flying at the moment. That was the last time I saw the fun-loving crime writers on stage. Val McDermott at the helm, among others. It's just gone from wild strength to strength. You've been at Glastonbury. How many times you played Glastonbury now?
Well, that's the thing. When I first did karaoke, it was in a place in Glasgow called Supercube, and they were asking if you'd done this before, and I realised I had done Glastonbury. I played Glastonbury more than I had sung karaoke, which is only that I'd done it twice. We played Glastonbury in 2019 and then last year 2024.
Okay, right. So we can see you this weekend talking about your wonderful books and maybe singing karaoke. While we're speaking about that, though, let's chat a little bit more about music. So we've gatecrashed yours, or maybe you have invited us round, who's to say. But before we get to the album that you've chosen us, you've been writing together officially as Ambrose Parry since, I think, 2018, early 2018, the first book was published, wasn't it? So you've been writing together from then, and probably a lot longer, which we'll come to. How long have you been listening to records together, Marisa? You and Chris Brookmyre.
Well, a long time, because we've been together a really long time. We met when we were 17, and when Chris asked me out, as soon as I said yes, he handed over a mixtape.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What was on it?
Oh, you'll probably remember better than me.
I can remember there was End Games were on there, and The Adventures.
Oh, nice.
And The Adventures, who released a new album this year, remarkably. Yeah. And there was an Irish band called Les Enfants. There was some Queen on there, which was a daring choice at that time. There was a band called Terraplane, who I think they morphed into Thunder, I think, in the end. Yeah. Some real deep cuts, shall we say, and a lot of Prefab Sprout also. So there was some cool stuff and some really, really hoary old embarrassing stuff.
And this was your opening musical gambit.
It's a rite of passage.
But I like that you waited till she said yes first. So was this tape for Marisa, or was this just for specifically?
What would have happened if I said no?
Quite. What happened to that tape? Yeah.
I think actually, we'd met at this kind of Outward Bound week before, and we talked a lot. And on the bus going home from, it was a 3-hour drive from the Highlands, and I'd really fallen for Marisa, and I was getting on the bus, and the only seat left in the minibus was an empty seat next to her. I mean, this was one of those occasions when the stars definitely aligned. And so we got to chat about things all the way down the road, and I said, I'll make you a mixtape. And that was before I asked her out. So I think I did a 2-for-1, and I asked her out and gave her the mixtape.
Oh, that's very cute. Do you still have it?
I think we do. I think we do have it somewhere.
It's on Spotify now as well.
Even better. The wonder of digital technology, right? So you met on this Outward Bound week. So where were you now? I know where you were because Chris and I, you had a bit of a baptism of fire the first time I interviewed you. we turned up. I was filming with STV, wasn't I? We turned up on your mum's doorstep into the living room where you had listened to all your music as a kid. Chris's mum made us scones. It was very, very lovely. Yeah, and we sat there and blethered for hours and hours, which was wonderful. But where were you at this point, Marisa? So did you grow up nearby, or was this the first time your paths had crossed on this outward bound weekend?
Yeah, we both lived in Glasgow, but different sides of Glasgow. So we had never met before. And I remember Chris kind of drew attention to himself because he was quite mouthy and very irreverent.
Okay.
So this was a kind of, it was run by the Catholic chaplaincy, this outward bound thing, and Chris kind of after dinner, we were sitting around having discussions, and Chris started ripping into the parish priest from his parish, and I'd never seen anyone be quite so irreverent in the presence of other priests before.
I remember describing them as two bigots and a simpleton.
Was that what swung it for you, Marisa? His way with
I
words?
just thought, my goodness, the confidence. I mean, it was really quite impressive and also very funny. I think that's what that's what meant he got away with being as irreverent, was he was very funny.
Okay. Oh, wow. All right, so you got this mixtape. Carry on,
Actually,
Chris.
just before that, one of the reasons that it was one of those things where everyone's kind of mucking in together, doing all the cooking, doing all the clearing up, and we were in the same kind of section for the night we were doing the cooking, and I was being mouthy in the kitchen, and I saw Marisa walk out, and I thought I'd said something to offend her, so and I thought it wasn't. I didn't want to think that was the kind of person I was, so I sought her out in the pub that night and got talking to her so she'd have a better impression of me. Turned out she just happened to be walking out. She hadn't even been listening to what I was saying.
So desperate to make a good impression, though, huh? Ah, that's lovely. Right, so we have the mixtape with Prefab Sprout and all the rest, the adventures and so on. I'm going to find that on Spotify. I'll put a link somewhere. But when did you first... How difficult was it for you to come up with a joint album to play us at this virtual afternoon or evening at yours?
Well, there was a lot of discussion about albums, and we realised that there was just so many to choose from that we ended up looking out all our old CDs, and there was a big pile of them in the kitchen, and we just worked our way through them all.
Really?
Yeah.
We'd a lot of overlap in our tastes, and I think that's one of the reasons we bonded back in 1985. It turned out we'd both been to the same big country concert at the Apollo. You know, we liked a lot of the same stuff already, and down the years we've always been into music. We've been to lots of gigs together, so it wasn't a huge area of conflict. It was more a question of saying, well, which of the Scottish albums do we think have really stood the test of time as well, or ones that you think that was a brilliant album, then you listen to it again and actually that's 3 good tracks and a lot of filler.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, so what did you go for?
Well, after a lot of discussion, we went for Waking Hours by Delamitri.
Yes, we've been playing a little bit, or actually quite a bit of it already. You'll hear some more. We're going to have an interval, incidentally, and for about 10 minutes, and I guess about half an hour or so, and then finish off. So you get a chance to hear some of it. It's an incredible record, even now, isn't it? It absolutely stands up.
I think it's a testament to the songwriting talent of Justin Curry. I think it's you listen to it now and it still sounds really fresh. It doesn't sound dated. It's really excellent. I remember listening to it. I was a final year medical student, and I remember sitting listening to it just on repeat. You know, it was back when you had records. You know. Yeah, it was.
Also, if you were a final year medical student, Waking Hours, I'm sure, was a very apt title. You probably didn't get very much sleep then at all, Marisa, I wouldn't imagine.
It was really just an accompaniment to studying at that point. But yeah, I remember just playing it on repeat. And it was just such a fun, as you said, it was like all killer, no filler. There was no kind of filler tracks on that album. And every now and then I listen to it again and it's still fantastic.
It's such kind of scope and the instrumentation of it meant that although it was late 1980s, it doesn't have a kind of 80s aesthetic to it. You know, it's very timeless. And for me, actually, a lot of the thing I associated it with was the late 80s, early 90s, and I'd just moved to London. And so around about this time of the year, September 89, and I remember listening to it a lot. It's that very, very stereotypically Scottish thing of being drawn to Scottish music and Scottish art once you've left Scotland because of the comforts of home. But it meant that the album just meant so much to me. Then I was listening to it, as Marisa says, on repeat because it reminded me of home.
It was written, a lot of it, very close to here. I think certainly Nothing Ever Happens. I've spoken to Justin about that, and I think he's certainly kind of looking over the Great Western Road at that point and sees a billboard. But there's something about, we spoke about this with Big Country as well, there's something about the atmosphere, but the lyricism, of the writing. They're almost short stories, a lot of them. Even just Nothing Ever Happens, And of course, if Nothing Ever Happens, it's such a compelling song, despite the fact it's almost like defying itself, isn't it? And that was their big hit. Broke them through.
One of those that was perfectly timed. It came out in January at the time when everybody's really fed up and feeling quite almost like everyone goes through their own personal existential crisis. Yeah. And it was the soundtrack to your existential crisis. But as you say, it was like short stories like Move Away Jimmy Blue. These are just pictures of despair, and it's almost like the things you imagine and that you extrapolate from some of those songs. So you imagine the stories behind them.
Yeah, Jimmy Blue in particular, I think, a bin full of tissues from made-up faces and a town full of nothing to do. I just watched that film over and over, right? It's like, it's so visual. Like, Justin will sometimes say he doesn't write about specifics, and there aren't many names in Delamitri songs. Jimmy Blue is one of the very few. But he conjures something which, as you say, Chris, means if you are here or if you're elsewhere, it absolutely draws you in and draws you to a sense of home, even though it's not ostensibly a Scottish album, but it is. The sort of mentality and the observations, I think, are very Scottish Marisa, right? It's like the way he sees the world is familiar to a lot of us.
Yeah, I think so. I think I pictured parts of Glasgow when I was listening to the album. So it feels very Scottish to me, despite the fact there's no bagpipes.
Yeah, no actual bagpipes.
No bagpipes.
But even just the kind of pallor of it, the greys and the blues are like the Glasgow skies. The Blue and Isle are the same, Deacon Blue are the same. They're referenced in something we'll speak about a little bit later. That was kind of the political climate a little bit at the time as well, wasn't it? I think everything just had this kind of like interesting sort of industrial sense to it, and finding hope beyond that. It
was the dying days of the Thatcher era as well. I think she probably didn't realise that, but it was the latter days of the Thatcher period, and there was a sort of combination of despair and a notion that everyone's really cumulatively fed up here, and that was coming out in the lyrics and the tone of it. Even songs like Stone Cold Sober, which is it's a very kind of powerful, and in some ways it's a quite soaring song, but it's a soaring song about misery. Yeah,
completely. I think he loves that, and there are also these brilliant, although it stands the test of time, but there are some wonderful sort of scenes in it that could only have been written at the time in which they were, or slightly earlier. So the kind of typewriters and the telephone exchanges that are mentioned in Nothing Ever Happens, and Empty has this scene where he wakes up and he says, it's the clock. You think the clock's reading SOS when it's just the clock saying 5:05. It's like, the digital alarm clock. Those were the days. How much detail and how cautious do you have to be about creating the scenes in? So we mentioned, obviously, with the Ambrose Parry books and with being in sort of 19th century Edinburgh, do you ever get caught out with, because you have to envisage so much detail about taking us back to that time and place. And of course, Chris has been writing fiction for many, many years, but your own research, Marisa, must have fed into that so much. Can you ever let that go and just allow us to be able to imagine something rather than checking every meticulous detail?
Well, I'm very much a details person, which I think probably drives Chris a bit insane, but yeah, I'm kind of all about the detail and the authenticity. Yeah. That's the bit that really fascinates me. So yeah, I kind of get into it, and although there's all sorts of daft stuff that happens when you're trying to be really authentic and you're trying really hard to not make mistakes. And I remember there was a scene where someone's being feeling very hemmed in, and I used the term claustrophobic, and Chris came along after and said, no, you can't use that, that's Freudian, so you'll have to think about something else, you'll have to put a different term in. And then it came to the proofs or something, or the one of the copy edits, and I put claustrophobic back in because I forgot, and it was in, out. But it's things like that. And then there's some phrases that you use, you think that sounds quite modern, and then you check and it's not. So it's even not just the kind of detail, the period detail, but the linguistics are really fascinating.
Did you know about claustrophobic? Because it has to get through so many nets to get to that point, but there will be a reader who is suddenly brought out of that.
Oh, it's all right, Chris caught it.
It was just that I remember at the time thinking I'd be interested in the etymology. I'm always interested in the etymology of that. I mean, one of my favourite writers is Neil Stevenson, and his Baroque Cycle is just full of amazing little anecdotes or nuggets about etymology. And I thought, so I looked up claustrophobic, and it was, I don't know if it was Freudian or not, but it was definitely, either late 19th century or early 20th. It was certainly post-dated our novel. So I'd probably come up with some cumbersome description of claustrophobic, which Marisa in a subsequent draft went through and thought, that's a terribly cumbersome description, why don't we just put claustrophobic?
That's collaboration, okay? At what point did you start discussing sort of Ambrose Parry as being a growing concern, and at what point did you actually bring the ideas onto the page? Because it's one thing to discuss them and share ideas, isn't it, and maybe have that collective imagination, but to actually sit down and go, right, okay, here's these characters, let's make that start. We met them in 2018, but how long had they been living with you guys?
Well, I think I had done a history of medicine degree, which is how it all started off. And I was just talking to Chris about some of the research I was doing for my dissertation, and telling him all sorts of wee stories. And he said, I think there's probably a book in this. And I kind of just thought that's something that writers say. And I kind of ignored it, but he kept coming back to it. He kept saying, no, I really think there's a novel in this. And we should write it together. And I hadn't done any creative writing before, so I didn't think that was very likely to happen. But you were just adamant that it would make a good novel, so you kept coming back to it.
I think this was about 2015, and Marisa had done her masters and was sort of thinking about what was next. She was going back doing some locums, and she was really quite keen on learning more about the world of Simpson and Edinburgh medicine at the time, and she was talking about maybe doing a PhD. And I said, well, yeah, that great if you want to do that, but we could write a novel together, because only about 5 people are going to read the PhD. Whereas if we write a novel, an awful lot more people are going to read it.
Yeah. And I mean, my goodness, it just flew, didn't it? People really fell for Raven and Sarah. Did you realise at that point, once you were convinced that this was the way to go, the PhD could wait, we're going to go into this incredible world, a lot of which is based in historical fact and developments in medicine and attitudes to women, which are many of the things that fascinate me about it. But did you know there was going to be, once they were on the page, they were going to have a lifespan? This is 5th, right? And that's not including the short stories as well. There's a world to delve into if you haven't read these yet. They're absolutely wonderful. Did you always know they were going to have a lifespan of more than one novel once you committed?
Well, I think I was kind of fairly surprised and delighted we got the first book done. But Chris had a kind of longer term view, and I remember the first kind of meeting we had with the publisher. We went through to Edinburgh to meet with some of the kind of the main people at Canongate, and they were saying this feels like the beginning of a series, and Chris was like, yeah, and they said, well, if that's the case, how many books do you think will be in the series? And Chris said 7. And after the meeting, I was like, where did you get 7 from? And he was like, 7's just a good number.
I remember, though, when we were writing the first book and we're sort of mapping things out and seeing where the characters are taking us, And Marisa saying, right, so when are they going to get together? And I was like, oh, not in this book. You know,
that's why we're going to keep.
Yeah, that's just the rules, you know.
Yeah. Well, you just wait. You couldn't wait.
Well, it wasn't just that. It was like, well, what if this is our only chance?
Of
see, I just
course,
assumed
right,
that maybe there might
okay.
just be the one, in which case we should tidy everything up. But Chris had more experience and more confidence that we could spin things out a bit.
Well, and then some. I think the wonderful thing for as a fan of the books and as a reader is that everyone I've read, I've loved, and then I've read the next one and loved it even more because we're getting to know the characters, their background. I'm understanding Edinburgh more. I've learned more about the history of medicine and the history of Edinburgh from that period through your books than and not the word claustrophobia than anything academic. But the more we get to know them, the more close we feel to them. And you've said that this is maybe maybe we're only on 5, by the way, and I am counting.
Yeah, I still think they're probably going to be 7, but we decided that after 5 books. Well, I think the thing is we started the first book was set in 1847, the year chloroform was discovered, and we thought we would write right through to Simpson dying in 1870, but we're 5 books in, we've only made it to 1854. And our 2 main characters, who were like 19 years old or something in the first book, so they're a little older, but so much has happened to them in a short period of time. We thought we might give them a break and leave them for a while and maybe come back to them when they're slightly older.
How do you... Are you able to switch off from them? Are you able to go about your day? This is for both of you, I guess, because it might be different, because it tends to be different depending on the writer. As I speak to, some people can kind of sign off from certain characters. I was speaking to Irvin Welsh about bringing back Trainspotting, and he's like, I can put them to bed. I can put Begbie and Spud and all the rest of it at the back of my mind if I'm working on some other things. But other people will say, like Val McDermott will say, oh, no, that's Karen Parry nipping at my head again for another book. Are they still with you? Do you still have situations and go, Sarah would such and such, or?
Well, because I've really just been writing the Ambrose Parry books with Chris, the 2 of them can live in my head kind of full time, but Chris does his own books in between, so I think you're much better at kind of ejecting them for a while.
Well, just for a while, because I think that Mark Billingham put it well when he said that once you start writing a book, you're never not writing it. You know, so the characters and the ideas are with you all the time. And I think with Raven and Sarah, our relationship with them has evolved over time, and that as they evolve, and we're always, when we're working on a book, we're always thinking about them, we're always talking about them. To the extent Marisa is very, very protective of Sarah, almost to the extent that it's like she's Sarah's mum. And so she'll disapprove of certain things, or she'll. I remember having this idea that in Voices of the Dead that Sarah was going to end up in a relationship with someone that I knew Marisa was not going to approve of, and it was a bit like like going to meet the in-laws or something, and trying to couch it in diplomatic terms, because I knew that she was protective of Sarah in particular. But also the fact that it's a blessing and a curse in that if you've got the characters in your head all the time, you they say when you're working at home, the great thing is, you're at home all the time, and so you can stop any time. But the fact is, it's like you're working all the time. You can never not be working. But the blessing was, like during the pandemic, we always had something to talk about because we were talking about these characters and we were writing A Corruption of Blood, and we always had something to discuss during what I like to call the great patter drought of 2020.
It gave you another world to live in, Marisa. Right?
It was great, actually. It was a great escape from looking at those horrible charts about infection rates and all this sort of thing. So it meant when there wasn't really anything else to talk about, we could disappear into 19th century Edinburgh, where they were having cholera epidemics, which which was pretty scary as well. And you kind of take reassurance from the fact that the world has been through this sort of thing before and come out the other side.
Yeah, quite. I think that's why we love fiction. That's why I think particularly we love crime fiction in any of its incarnations, historical, sci-fi or otherwise, because we kind of feel no matter how grim it might get, it's self-contained, isn't it? It's going to finish and we're going to get to the other end. Okay, so we're going to talk about books a little bit more a little bit later, and also your joint chosen one for now. But let's move on to movies first now. Last time when Chris and I recorded this at Europa, I asked if he would make us any snacks before he played us our film, and he told me he made a mean guacamole. So what would you be making us, Marisa? Or would Chris be making us all guacamole?
Well, guacamole would be welcome, but I think
it would inevitably be something involving marrow at the moment.
You got a glut.
Marissa decided to grow some courgettes. We didn't realise that courgettes, if you take your eye off them for a fortnight, become marrows. And I've been making some remarkable, everything from marrow pakora, marrow totty scones, but marrow. It works really well, actually nicer than totty scones.
Really?
So you'd be getting marrow scones.
Honestly, I mean they're almost horror veg. They're amazing because I've experienced the same thing. You do take your eye off, or you'll be picking them, and then you're like, "What is that over the back?" And there will be this. How can you miss them? I'll get your marrow pakora. So we'll maybe go for some marrow pakora, and you're going to put on a movie for us. And the one you've gone for is one of the more recent films that have been chosen. Quite often people go back in time, and we'll no doubt touch on some of them. But you've gone for an absolutely lovely film. I think it's 2014, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Thereabouts. Yeah. Tell us about it, what we did on our holiday.
Yeah, well, this might be a slightly unusual choice, what we did on our holiday, but it's the reason that it really resonated with me or really stuck with me was that we were going to go to the cinema on a kind of wet Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and there wasn't really anything on apart from this film, what we did on our holiday, and we sat and watched the YouTube trailer, and it did have to say they didn't do a very good job of the trailer because we were like, it doesn't look very good, but there's nothing else to do, let's just go anyway. And it was just wonderful. It was a wonderful wet afternoon film. It was set in the Highlands of Scotland. It has David Tennant in it, Rosamund Pike, who are kind of a couple who are on the verge of divorce, and they've gone to visit family in the Highlands with their small children, and they're trying to pretend that they're not getting a divorce because David Tennant's father is dying of cancer, so they're trying to put on this act that everything's wonderful. And the father/grandfather figure is played by Billy Connolly, and it's just marvellous. It was produced by the people who did the BBC comedy Outnumbered, and the performances that they got out of the children were just phenomenal. It was genuinely really warm, really funny, with beautiful Highland scenery. It was just a joy.
I could not agree more. It's an absolutely lovely film. Billy Connolly is just utterly wonderful in it, and just that lovely familiarity you get. But as with so many wonderful Scottish films, particularly, I guess, things like Gregory's Girl and Restless Natives, but it's across the board. This has got that same idea of the kids really being, Chris, a lot more grown up than the grown-ups.
I think it's such a sort of charming film, and yet dark, and you see a kind of contrast in that because it's the kids. A lot of it's through the kids' eyes. The parents' behaviour is reframed because you're seeing these kids' response to it. And so many movies where they write lines for kids, they don't sound like kids, or even if the psychology is correct, it's all too carefully phrased. What's so funny is clearly they must have filmed hours of footage to improvise with these kids. There's like a great moment where Ben Miller is trying to tell them what he does for a living, and and he's kind of being evasive because he's slightly embarrassed about being in the city or being an investor. He's saying things like, "Well, I'm a short seller," and it's like the wee girl saying, "You sell shorts," but they just keep asking really awkward questions. But I'm sure these were genuine awkward questions. But I think what made the film absolutely explode for us, I remember just crying with laughter and also gasping in disbelief, was a film that just goes places you just do not think the film is possibly going to go. I mean, it's that the kids do something. You think, no, they're not really going to do that, are they? And then they take it so much further than you think it's going to go, and milk it for every possible laugh. Yeah. And yet it's so plausible. You know, it's like the kid logic of it. I'm trying really hard not to spoil this, because it's so funny.
It is absolutely brilliant, and yeah, honestly, if you've seen it, you'll know what we mean, and if you haven't, you'll appreciate why we don't want to spoil it. But it is so worth watching, and there are so many lovely scenes in it. But it is very natural. It's a lovely thing, and again, the older sister has this book of because she needs a list of the lies we're going to tell, you know. And it is a lot about the stories we tell ourselves. This chimes very much with the book you've chosen as well, which we'll talk about shortly. But Billy Connolly says at some point, but a lot of life doesn't look very good written down. It's the truth. It's the truth of it.
It's that what I love about it, like any movie or any book, where they really commit to a theme and bring the theme out all over the place. And so Billy Connolly says at one point that we're all ridiculous.
Yes.
You know, so much of it is about people trying to put on a public version of themselves that's palatable. He says we're all ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the film really leans into that people need to learn to embrace their own ridiculousness.
Yeah, and not be ashamed of themselves. It tackles depression in a really interesting way as well, but at the end of the day, the fact that it is discussed and it is, again, very overtly revealed, I guess is the way to put that, means that everyone talks about it, and it reduces the stigma of it, and it reduces the shame of it. And, you know, the death of shame I just thought was such an interesting title for this book, and also idea to explore, because a lot of the time I think in the modern way, you know, we now know to talk about shame and to appreciate shame and to realise that if you strip it away a little bit, in whatever way you're dealing with it or it's saddening you, it can be helpful. But it's explored, you know, shame's not a new concept at all, is it? And that seems like something that really resonated in this book. Hidden depths, family secrets, and what we do with them, Marisa.
Yeah, I think we were quite interested in the whole... it's like how people are controlled in a society is shame, largely. And when you realise that it maybe doesn't have the power over you that has been suggested, that's when you can become free of it. And I think it was certainly far more prevalent in the past, especially to do with women, shame, and how it kept women in line. But it's certainly not gone away, has it? With all the stuff that people are still struggling with, especially with online things, online shaming, that's still a big thing. It's just, the shame is still there. There's just new methods of kind of making people suffer as a result of it. But I guess it's that thing, realising that if you can shake free of it, it's a very useful thing. If you can stand up and say this is rubbish, you know, you can't shame me about this. I don't know why I'm saying this. I'm a very easily embarrassed person.
I'm loving it. This is it.
But the theory is good, you know.
It is, absolutely. And I do think just to explore ideas of that aren't just in the online world or in the kind of modern world, when we're even just accepting it or understanding it as a term, articulating it. Yeah. So I loved that about the book, that it's exploring, because you know, the various books have explored so many different ideas which might seem modern in some ways, magic and, you know, the illusion of people or the illusion of self. And shame is a part of that. And certainly within that wonderful film What We Did on Our Holiday, there's a really lovely scene when when a woman who has been really horribly affected by depression and mortified by something, and it's just stripped away. It's that same thing, isn't it? It actually becomes really lovely. Sorry, Chris.
I was just going to say it's that thing whereby as well, that it's the people closest to you that you're most afraid of embarrassing embarrassing them as well as being embarrassed in front of them. And I guess it's like Billy Connolly's message in it to them is that you shouldn't feel that. You've got to be there for each other and be embracing not only of your own ridiculousness, but of each other's ridiculousness.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we are going to have a little break for like 5 or 10 minutes if you fancy getting a coffee or doing anything you would like for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to come back. So I'm watching the clock, and the reason is various, but also we've got to watch for Chris's parking. So so if you fancy, like, we're going to hopefully, wonderful Sean, who's doing all the text, going to put on some music for about 10 minutes. We will get off the stage and I'll tidy up all the things that I kicked over, and we'll be back to talk about your choice of book. And also, if any of you guys have got any questions for Chris and Marisa, there's going to be a roving mic as well, so you can get them ready. We'll try and squeeze all of that in, and we'll get Chris away for his parking at 10 to 4. That's what's going to happen.
I should add, it's not just the parking. I've also got to go and pick up Mark Billingham from Motherwell railway station.
Rock and roll lifestyle. This is bloody Scotland weekend. It's partying. Hopefully we'll see some of you there as well. Anyway, we'll be back in 10 minutes, but I'm going to try and edit this into the podcast. I'm not sure how this is going to work, but what would be really helpful would just be a little interval round of applause for Chris and Marisa, really loud. Wait till you hear how this gets edited. It will be interesting. I have no idea how that's going to work either. Anyway, thank you for coming back. Got a little bit of music there as well. I think this time, look, I've just chucked my cushion off the back. I can't be trusted anywhere. I just like trash things. And lovely Fraser and Sean and everyone at the stand. Didn't they make a lovely job? Do you see the flowers behind me and everything? It's very fancy, just for you guys. So we've had a chat. Let's imagine we're back at yours. Okay. We've had our marrow pakora. We've had our marrow tatty scones. We're taking a few home with us. But before we go, you're going to give us some bedtime reading. So we've listened to Della Mitre. We have watched that wonderful film, Billy Connolly and David Tennant and Rosamund Pike and the rest in that. The kids are awesome. Then you're going to give us some bedtime reading. Now, obviously you write together. Reading's a different thing from watching a film together or listening to a record together. What's your relationship with Ian Banks, first of all, Marisa? Because I know that Chris is a huge fan, and we'll come to that. But do you remember when you started reading his books?
Well, I don't share Chris's enthusiasm for science fiction, so I didn't ever read any of Ian's sci-fi books, but I loved all the other ones, and I think he really was just kind of at the peak of his powers, probably in, when would you say, the mid-80s, early 90s?
I think right through the 90s.
Yeah. And so I think we both agreed that Ian Banks was probably one of the best Scottish writers, certainly of our kind of generation, that meant a lot to both of us. So although Chris had picked Espadare Street when he was on the podcast last time, we still decided that we would pick another Ian Banks book, and it would be The Crow Road.
I mean, every one of them is magical in its own way, but what's fascinating about Ian Banks is, as you say, as Ian M. Banks, that was kind of slightly delineated, and we understood that within his world, his mad world, that was sci-fi. But what's interesting is strips with various books, and certainly The Crow Road, Chris, this is a crime book as much as it's a family book, right? But it was never ever sort of marketed that way. He was never really, if you like, put on the shelves as a crime writer. But this is a family mystery as it is anything else, really.
Yeah, The Crow Road and Complicity would both be tagged as crime novels. And we talked about how we were saying about how many great Scottish books there'd be and which ones we should choose. And obviously lots of the books we've read are crime fiction. And there's a lot of crime fiction you're reluctant to revisit because once you know the secrets of it. But I think some of the best crime fiction is about far more than that. And The Crow Road is first and foremost about family. I mean, there's so many themes swirling through it, as with all of Ian's work, but it's those the complex and really deep relationships within family that can hide these secrets for decades. I think we both loved it because we both know what it's like to be from a big messy family. You know, there's a line in The Crow Road where they're looking for a collective term for one particular branch of the family, and they come up with an embarrassment of
riches.
Yeah, and so it's just one of these things that it spoke to both of us, I think, on a number of levels, and it's also we can't scoot past it. It's like if you're back in the early 90s, if you're picking this up in a bookshop, you're not walking out without buying it once you've read that first line, which is, "It was the day my grandmother exploded."
It's perfect. And it only gets better. Okay, it actually lives up to that line, which is quite something. The power of an opening line is very forceful, including the opening line of your debut novel, Chris Brookmyre. I think we might be in a church. I don't know if we're allowed to say it out loud.
We're on the stage of the stand. I think it's probably been deconsecrated very thoroughly.
Give us the opening. 2 words, quite ugly one morning, just about to turn 30, in fact, is it?
Yeah, it'll be 30 years next summer.
Yeah.
And there was an American review of it, or American Amazon review, saying that they can take a certain amount of profanity, but I could not get past the first word. The word was Jesus. Admittedly, the second word was fuck.
How early on did you have that as the opening salvo for your opening book?
I remember just having the idea for the story and then having this notion. I woke up one day thinking, I'll come up with the most mental crime scene imaginable. And then I thought, well, how would anyone react to this? And I thought that what they would say is, Jesus, fuck. Because that's what I would say if I walked into this situation.
It's so absolutely true. I spoke to the wonderful theatre and telly legend Dave Anderson, who might even be here, I'm not sure, but about it he chose, did I hear? Yes, he is. Fantastic. And Dave chose Quite Ugly One Morning by lovely Chris Brookmyre as his choice of book when he did an All Back to Mine special. And we spoke at length about the kind of like joy in such a grotesque, if you like, scene. You know, it's unforgettable and you kind of just keep going, it can't get any worse, and it does. Like the fun you must have had, and again within this loose idea of storytelling, you can take us pretty far.
I remember just thinking the only rule I had was that no matter how awful this scene got, it all had to ultimately tell you something about the crime, you know, that it would be unravelled, that there would be some sort of clues or explanations for everything, including the jobby on the mantelpiece. So this wasn't a gratuitous jobby, you know. It had to have, it was a not plot crucial, but it was, you know, plot relevant jobby, and so it was just I wasn't overdoing it, I thought. But the one thing my editor asked me to cut was there was in the original version, the first draft, there was and one of the policemen just eventually can't take it anymore, and he runs out of the flat, skids on a pile of sick, or blood or vomit or pee or something, skites across the close and hits the banister or the railing at kind of midriff level, which causes him to vomit onto 2 other policemen who are coming up the stairs. And my editor says, I think this is just a boke too many.
Is that right? It's a well-coined
a
phrase.
boke too far.
That's just a boke too far. Is that right? That's it. Line drawn. Even then, though, I mean, obviously we've spoken about Ambrose Parry being officially your collaboration, your writing collaboration. Chris, you've said in the past that even then, even when you're writing, you know, your very, very early books, you know, Marisa's experience and tales and imagination is feeding into them, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the inspiration for Quite Ugly One Morning was when Marisa was working in the dawn of the NHS trusts, first of all in Essex and then in Edinburgh, and the story she was telling me. But she came up with the plot for Quite Ugly One Morning, but that's why, if you look at it, it says it's dedicated simply for M. As Marisa said, don't put my name on that. Because she was working at the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh at the time, and a plot involving someone clearing geriatric beds by the simple expedient of murdering the patients was not something she wanted to be readily associated with.
Did you know how much your experience was feeding into the book? What was your experience of reading it for the first time? I don't know whether that was in one or if you were reading drafts along the way, Marisa. Is it how you envisaged when Chris was like, yeah, some of your experiences are going to be on the page, Marisa? Sorry.
Actually, I recognised some of the stories, and I just found it quite interesting how he had manipulated them to kind of suit the plot, but there was lots of little bits that I thought, oh yeah, I remember telling him that. I remember telling him that. But yeah, I was fairly junior, a fairly junior position, and I was trying to keep a low profile, and I didn't really want people to think that I had been putting these ideas in your head.
Just to bring us back actually to Ian Banks, when Marisa was working in Edinburgh at that time, we were living in MacDonald Road in Edinburgh, and it was one of the first years that I was at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and Ian Banks was having a launch event at the book festival, and we were both invited, and oh my God, were we excited. But as fate would of course have it, Marisa was on call, and it was the first time either of us ever owned a mobile phone. She went out and bought a mobile phone, this absolute brick of a thing, so that she could be on call and still go and meet Ian Banks.
Oh, wow.
And I remember you being pretty terrified. Not that he's a scary person, but just
intimidated by his brilliance, really. Yeah. You know, when I'm very easily starstruck. So I was delighted to be invited, and I was very fortunate that I wasn't called. This was, it was very unusual at that stage to be allowed to be on call from home, which is why it was all the excitement of having a big brick of a mobile phone and sitting there staring at it, waiting for it to ring the whole time. But yeah, that was a very memorable evening.
He's such an incredible character across Scottish literature and had so many ideas, but also the number of writers I speak to, Chris, who say, you know, he kind of showed me the possibilities of what a story could be, what a writer could be.
I felt like when I first read The Wasp Factory, it was this kind of awakening of thinking, oh, right, so you're allowed to do this. You're allowed to be as Scottish as this. You're allowed to be as warped as this. Warped in a way that I really recognised as feeling very Scottish. And the type of stories that I was thinking up myself at the time and thinking, well, that's all very well amusing me, but where's it going to go? The more I read of Ian, the more I realised, oh, you can get published. And when Quite Ugly One Morning was first submitted by my agent, there was a number of publishers wanted it. And when I found Little Brown wanted it, and I knew that's who published Ian Banks, and that
really?
I was so excited. So it's like, it's got to be Little Brown. And fortunately, they were also offering the most money. But you know, but it was one of those things I thought that elevated their status in my eyes to be published by the same publisher as Ian. But he was such a kind of generous person in lots of ways, very inspiring. You know, he always had time for you. I remember one of the first times I went to some kind of big Little Brown do. It was a dinner, an anniversary dinner for Abacus, the paperback imprint, and we sat together at this dinner, and I would just burn the poor guy's ear all night in full fanboy mode, but he was so indulgent and generous. And I remember him telling me about some, it was Penfolds Grange that he said was the best tasting wine in the world, and he told me all about it, and then a couple of weeks later he just sent us a bottle, and it was 50 quid. A bottle of this stuff, and that was 20 years ago. And so rather than just describe it, he sent the bottle. You know, he was generous with his time. He's generous of spirit, and he was generous materially.
The books are so enlightening, and The Crow Road, when I've reread it, knowing that we were going to chat about it, I mean, his language, his writing is utterly wonderful, but so funny as well. You know, sometimes when you should be laughing and sometimes when you shouldn't, which I guess is a bit like what we did on our holiday in certain scenes. You know, it's that brilliant tension. But it is, again, about the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that our families tell. It's a family epic as well, The Crow Road, and goes back to stories of childhood. Were you always telling stories, Chris? Like, were you always writing stories?
Yeah, I mean, from as soon as I could write sentences, I was starting to write stories. It felt natural, you know. I couldn't, anything that made an impression on me, I kind of couldn't rest. I had to create some derivative equivalent of it. So from a very early age, I was writing usually very dark stories. It had to be fair to say. And with that, I remember thinking, we're it sounds like I must have had a warped upbringing or something, and I really didn't. It was because, and then I remember Ian Banks telling a story about how he was signing books one day, and someone came up and said, "Did you have a really disturbed childhood?" And he said, "Well, why don't you ask my mum? She's right there." And then so he directed this woman to his mother, and he said he could overhear his mum going, "Oh, Ian was a really happy wee boy."
Lovely. Well, that's it. Then the imagination can go as far as it's about telling stories, but also about reading them and the possibilities of them. Did you have any particular sort of favourite books when you were growing up?
Oh, I always loved historical fiction.
Okay.
Yes, I loved historical fiction. So I read a lot of like Nigel Tranter, and Neville Shute, and all sorts of anything that was kind of exotic and historical. I really loved.
Because history, that in and of itself, is quite exotic, isn't it? Because it's taken us to this far away place, and so that always captured your imagination, Marisa.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you ever write at all? You said you didn't. You used the word creative writing. Obviously, you hadn't been doing that. But obviously, within your work, there's a lot of writing as such. Is it a completely different discipline for you? Because you've obviously been sharing ideas with Chris and therefore writing, if not on the page, really for decades, not really just with Ambrose Parry.
Yeah, I think Chris always said I had reasonable... Well, you said that I was good at kind of editorial decision-making, and I had some interesting ideas about plot and story. And we did kind of work... there was a little bit of collaboration at times. Chris used to write himself into a corner every now and then. And he would say, "I'm a bit stuck." And I'd be like, "Right, okay." And so we'd go to the pub, and he would outline where he was in the book, and he would have to put up with me going, What? How did you get there? What a mess. And then once we'd got through that, we would start trying to figure out how to get to the end. And I remember I think it was one fine day in the middle of the night, and we went to the pub, and it was a bit murky in the middle, and it was hard to see how we would get to the end. And we ended up with a big sheet of paper with lots of diagrams, and I think they'd probably call it mind mapping now or something. But there was a big bomb in the middle. And then we figured it all out. And then when we got up to leave the table, we realised we'd been sitting at table 42.
There you go. So you just have to let the universe work things out for you sometimes as well. But I think that the editorial role, I mean, we heard a little bit of Deacon Blue there. I know that's another band that you guys love, and they feature in the Crow Road, that very song, in fact, Born in a Storm, brilliantly, bringing in a character who deserves that, and then some, the Hurricane. But yeah, Ricky Ross has spoken to me in the past about the importance of Lorraine McIntosh to the songwriting, not just literally co-writing songs, but also being the one kind of standing back and going, what about that? Or asking questions of something, or asking about the possibilities of something. And it is about what's not there or what's taken away, Chris, as well, isn't it? As much as what you're throwing at the story, or otherwise.
I used to, though, I would. Marisa was often my first reader, usually my first reader, and I know I was on the right track when at some point she would say, "You can't say that." and if she got all through the book and didn't come to me and say, "Oh, that you can't put this in the book," if I hadn't got that, I'd have felt the book had failed. Right. So it obviously became harder and harder to shock her, but that was a good editorial rule of thumb. But also, Marissa's got a very very good sense of sort of editorial cohesion and clarity. So she'll let me know if it's not as clear, if the plot isn't being told in a way that draws you along the way it should. She's not always delicate in conveying that, but that in a way that then I've got her voice in my head while I'm writing. I can hear her saying, "This makes no sense," or "What does this mean? Why are these things not clear?" And so you anticipate that and try, and I think one of the best examples was with The Cracked Mirror, because it's such a complex novel that I kept, even Marisa and I had thrashed out the overall structure and the plot, but it's a complex story to tell, and at all times, given some of the technical elements of it, I thought I need to write this in a way that I know Marissa's not going to do what we call the face.
doing the face.
It's just if I'm not understanding something, there's a face.
And to be fair, this is, absolutely brilliant. Last year did that come out now, The Cracked Mirror? So we've got an LA hard-boiled cop, and we've got an incredible Miss Marple-esque villager in Perthshire, another incredible book. However, I'm very conscious of time. Just very, very briefly, and then we'll let you go. It's 1:45, so we've got a couple of minutes. What next? I know we've got a quite ugly one evening coming up.
I've just... Today, I actually sent off the final corrections, so that
really,
Quite Ugly One Evening will be out in May, and it's 30 years on, and it's Jack Parlebane on board a transatlantic cruise ship. It's a locked room mystery.
Oh, I'd love a locked room. And what for you guys? If we've got the gang, if we've got Raven and Sarah, maybe let's say quiet for a little while. You writing more together?
Yeah, we're just about to start the next Ambrose Parry book, and we are going to do a bit of time travel. We're going to move to a different time period and a different city.
Oh, wow. And that's all you're telling us. And you've not even said if it's in the past or the future.
Definitely the past.
That'd be quite a pivot. Yeah. I'd be quite into that, you know. And listen, anything's possible. Listen, if it's good enough for Highlander, Chris Brookmyre, right? It's good enough for Ambrose Parry. Okay, I'm going to let you get your parking. And Mark Billingham. And we'll see you at Bloody Scotland, and see you guys, if any of you are coming to Bloody Scotland. All weekend kicks off tomorrow in lovely Stirling. But for now, thank you so much for coming. It's really lovely to see you. Thank you to the stand. And a huge thanks to Chris and Marisa. I'll need to be louder though. And louder. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much again to Fraser, Sean, Tommy and all of the brilliant gang at the stand in Glasgow. And huge thanks again to Ambrose Parry, Chris Brookmyre and Marisa Haetzman. Their books are a revelation, a mystery and a thrill. Here's to many more of them. Chris's The Cracked Mirror won the McIlvanney Prize for Scottish Crime Fiction Book of the Year last year. Ambrose Parry were rightly nominated this year, and not for the first time. And this year's winner is going to be announced at Bloody Scotland tomorrow. I was on the judging panel this year, which was a privilege and an absolute nightmare. Honestly, what with so many of the books being absolutely exceptional. You can listen back to Dave Anderson chatting about his love for Chris Brookmyre in an earlier episode of I Kick Up the Arts, All Back to Mine. And Dave, I should say, himself features in so many of the films that guests have chosen as their favourites over the years. Gregory's Girl, Local Hero, Restless Natives, and I'm going to have more for you, incidentally, on the latter very soon. Justin Curry from Delamitre's All Back to Mine, which we recorded live at the stand in Edinburgh as part of this year's Fringe, is coming very soon. And Justin and I are also in conversation at I Write in Glasgow. I think that's in November. I don't have my diary on me. It's later this year. There are a few tickets left, I know that much, if you are very, very fast. I mean a handful. Move swiftly. And you can listen back to that earlier podcast chat with Chris Brookmyre, and indeed this year's Bloody Scotland launch podcast with Ian Rankin, Natalie Jane Clark, Linwood Barclay and Morgan Cry, If the Mood Takes You, which it should. You can find that wherever you hear your podcasts, right where you're listening to them right now, in fact. And I would love to see you at a live event soon. I am back at the stand in Glasgow once a month till the end of the year, with Denise Mina on October the 9th, with Sanjeev Kohli on November the 13th, and get this, with Teenage Fan Club's Norman Blake. He's going to be chatting and playing songs. That is on December the 11th. You heard it here first. You really did, incidentally. I haven't even officially announced those dates. But if you go to the stand website and if you search for A Kick Up the Arts, just click on the month that you fancy and hey presto, you get tickets early. All right, it has been a long day. It is going to be a long weekend. Scotland, bloody Scotland. Hope to see you somewhere soon. Bye for now.